In the book, you tell stories, of a lot of martyrs, and I was wondering if you could maybe pick one or two that specifically to share with our listeners, where it shows this person being not excited, but almost like fearless as they kind of walk towards the flames, the swords, the lions, knowing that or believing that this act is somehow going to make them a true disciple. It's going to get them the big pat on the back from God, and that this martyrdom is actually like a good thing to exist in the world.
Yeah, I'd love to tell a couple of stories.
Mhm.
But I mean, we can back up just very briefly, right?
Mhm.
And think about that where the roots of this are. The idea of reverencing and imitating the death of Jesus
Mhm.
is right there in the New Testament itself. I mean,
Yeah.
you can think about how the Gospels quote Jesus as warning his disciples that they're going to be flogged and dragged before kings and governors for the sake of his name.
Yeah.
Or I mentioned Stephen just a minute ago. Think how the Acts of the Apostles narrates his death, right? He's
Mhm.
traditionally celebrated as the first Christian martyr. That's why his feast day is December 26th, right after
Mhm.
the Nativity, the beginning of the liturgical year, the place of honor there. Uh, so as Stephen is being stoned to death, there's a fascinating parallel between Jesus's death as it's narrated in Luke and that of Stephen in
Mhm.
Acts. Same author, so it makes sense, right?
Mhm.
Author of Luke Acts. But Stephen repeats Jesus's final words from the cross, but instead of saying, Father, receive my spirit, he says, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Right? This is why he's called the first Christian martyr, because in
Mhm.
more or less his own words, he's dying for Christ.
Yeah, sunny days. No clouds in the sky, about to get away. Feels like it's been a freaking decade. Sorry, don't call me, cause I'm gonna be on break. Sunny day, make way. All the stress and doubt, yeah, not today. Feels like it's been a freaking decade. Sorry, don't call me, cause I'm gonna be on break. Got the Tropicana, fresh cut sushi
Hey
on
everybody,
the
welcome
plate.
back to the
Brandy heavy, I
podcast.
don't
Today
let
we're
it
sitting
show.
down with a brand new friend. His name is Kyle
24/7,
Smith.
but now
He
we're
has written
breaking
an
laws.
amazing
Next
book
minute, yo,
called
miss you
Cult
coming
of
for
the
a ride.
Dead,
Coming for a
A
shot.
Brief History of Christianity. And so Kyle, welcome to the podcast. It's so good to finally get some time with you.
Thank you so much for having me on, Glenn. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Definitely. So before we dip our toes into this work, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, especially for people who are new to you and to your work? Who is Kyle Smith? What do we need to know?
Well, I'm a Libra. Uh, no,
I'm an Aquarius.
uh, there we go. Um, I'm a professor at the University of Toronto.
Mhm.
I've been here for about 13 years. My training background, academic background, is all in early Christianity, Christianity in late antiquity, and a lot of the stuff I did in the past focused on the fourth century. So this is the era of Constantine,
Mhm.
and then specifically, I've always been very interested in Christianity sort of in the Roman Persian borderlands, basically what's now Turkey, Syria,
Mm.
Iraq, and the Christians of Persia as well. So that area, the main literary language of Christians there was the Christian dialect of Aramaic called Syriac.
Mhm.
A lot of fundamental texts written in that language. But I teach, at the undergrad and graduate level, a lot more broadly, especially at the undergrad level. I teach courses on monks and
Mhm.
asceticism and the history of Christian monasticism, but also martyrs and the saints. And then the chair of my department wanted me to do some more. I suppose courses that might be more interesting to everybody, and he said, "How about a course on Christian holidays?" And I said, "Well, that would be huge." And
Mm.
he said, "Well, what about just one? What about Christmas?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, okay, I'll do that." And so that sort of turned into a side project, which is now led into the book that I'm currently working on,
Mm.
which is called "The Many Lives of Saint Nick," about Saint Nicholas.
Interesting.
Um, yeah, but my cocktail party answer is, how did you get into this? It's always one word, Yoda. Kind of always been interested in the the people in the waste places or out in the desert who
Yeah.
know things that everybody else doesn't know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, even when I was growing up, I grew up in central Kentucky, sort of bourbon and horse country,
Mm.
and I grew up kind of quasi Catholic. And what I mean by that is that I didn't go to Catholic school, but my mom, who was raised Catholic,
Mm,
made us go to CCD on Sundays because we didn't go to Catholic school. My dad, had no interest in any of this.
mm,
And then when I was in high school, the the teacher of the class, sort of much to the chagrin of a lot of the parents, decided to do more of a comparative religions approach.
mm.
And so he took us out to this Zen monastery out in the Daniel Boone Forest in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, and called Furnace Mountain, still there, still functional.
Mm.
And that really kind of caught my interest academically. And even once I got my driver's license, I would actually, go out there on the weekends. It's sort of
Mm.
a weird thing for a 16-year-old to do, right? But then when I became an undergrad, I studied at Notre Dame. I studied philosophy, and especially when you're at a school like that, and you're doing historical philosophy, there's not a huge
Mm.
leap from the Stoics to all of the people in early Christianity who are trained on Greek
Yeah.
philosophy and reading people like the Stoics, right?
Mm.
Um, I ended up then continuing on doing a master's degree at Notre Dame, and then in between the master's degree and my PhD down in your neck of the woods at Duke, um, I was a Fulbright fellow in Jerusalem for a year and spent most of the time learning Armenian, classical Armenian, and Syriac, but then also just hiking out to the Byzantine era monasteries in the Judean desert. I mean, this was 20 years ago. This is
Yeah.
not exactly the time to do that now, but you'd always have to go on Saturdays because you would traverse an Israeli artillery range, but you knew that they weren't there on Saturdays.
Wow.
But I got to know an archaeologist at the Hebrew University, and he sort of showed me the route. So you can walk from Jerusalem to the Dead Sea in a day, no problem, and then
Mm.
take the bus home. I think we maybe some. I love the story about Mark Twain. He's got, he grew up, of course, on the Mississippi River, and he's singing, these spirituals roll on Jordan,
Yeah.
and then he actually gets to the Holy Land and sees the Jordan. It's like this is a creek where I'm from, right? Yeah,
Right.
so the land is compressed in ways that
Mm.
I think if you're familiar with the Bible and have this sort of imagination of biblical history, it's this
Yeah.
expansive land, but then you get there and everything's right on top of one another. But that, as my father used to say, was a long walk for a ham sandwich. But you know, it seems like kind of a well scripted novel, like when you're telling it in retrospect, like, oh, of
Right.
course, this is how I ended up, in this professorial position. But it's kind of, at the time, it's just pinging from one thing to the next.
Yeah. Would you say that that moment, like when you talk about comparative religion, like would you say that that
Yeah,
moment in your life as like I think you said you were 16, was that like do you think that was like looking back like a defining moment that kind of opened up a well to bring you where you are today?
yeah, it was.
Mm.
And there already kind of was that history in Kentucky,
Mm.
with Thomas Merton, who came
Sure.
from New York and
Yeah.
then lived at Gethsemane, out in Western Kentucky, south of Louisville,
Mm.
the other direction. But he too, right, was very much interested in corresponding with other monks, not just Christian monks, but
Yeah.
the Dalai Lama and others. And I think kind of being aware of or at least more aware, in my teenage years, of the breadth of interest in ultimate reality from so many different perspectives was something that even then, years ago, uh, I knew was something that if I had the opportunity, wanted to spend my life pursuing.
Yeah.
I think though, my problem, puts problem in scare quotes,
Hmm.
um, is that it was at the same time personal and introspective, but it was always more sort of academic.
Mm.
I was always more interested in learning about Zen Buddhism, for example, rather than actually practicing it.
Sure,
Because
sure.
practicing it's too hard. You got to get up too early. You got to,
It's too many
your legs
things.
fall asleep, right?
Right.
That's too painful.
Right.
So it's,
The
I'd
theory is
rather
much
just
easier
be
to grasp.
theory, much easier to grasp. Yeah. But that certainly was a formative experience for me. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, so your book. Let's start with the title of the book,
Yeah.
"Cult of the Dead." Because when I think of cult, I think of David Koresh, right? I
Hmm.
think of that show Criminal Minds, where they're chasing down heinous criminals who sometimes are cult leaders committing these horrendous acts in God's name. But that's not at all what this book is about. So talk to us a little bit about the title of the book, the word cult. What can people expect if they were to pick up this book? What's it about? Who's it for?
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, you're right. I mean, it is a negative term, the way that we use it now. It summons up this idea of a sect and some sort of strange
Yeah.
and sinister beliefs and practices.
Hmm.
So, am I using the word in that way? Not exactly.
Hmm.
There is a straightforward, simply descriptive way of understanding cult, which is used among scholars all the time to refer to the cult of the saints. This is nothing that new that I've coined. I
Hmm.
mean, it's a common neutral term. But it's used as a means of referring simply to the ritual practices of care and devotion that
Hmm.
Christians had for the saints and martyrs
Hmm.
for centuries, still
Hmm.
do. So etymologically, I mean, it means care. Think of the word agriculture, right?
Hmm.
Care for the fields, or to cultivate a plant, or to cultivate a child's love of music is to care for it, to
Hmm.
nurture it. So to say that Christianity is a cult of the dead isn't to malign it, but to emphasize the extent to which the care for the saints fundamentally shaped the culture of Christianity.
Hmm.
Um, but on the other hand, I mean, I think to an audience living, now in 2024, even Christians, right, many varieties of Christians probably would see the ritual practices involving the saints and martyrs, at least in antiquity and in the Middle Ages, as pretty strange and sinister.
Hmm.
So let me give you an example of what I mean. Have you ever been to Canterbury Cathedral in England?
No, nope.
Yeah. So, um, I mean, the cathedral it's amazing, medieval cathedral, the
Hmm.
seat now of the Anglican Church, Church of England. But 850 years ago, on actually, we know the exact date, it was December 29th, 1170. It was a Tuesday after Christmas. Thomas Becket was the bishop at the time and was killed in his own cathedral, in Canterbury Cathedral, having to do with a dispute with the king, with Henry II.
Hmm.
And a cult dedicated to Thomas the Martyr, to Thomas Becket, developed in the late 12th century, literally overnight. The very same evening that he was killed, so the story goes, a townsman got a cloth that had been soaked in the bishop's blood. He took it home, he rinsed it out as best he could, and this is the gross part. He gives the washing water to his wife to drink. And according to him, she's immediately cured of her
Hmm.
paralysis, right? And there is story after story preserved in texts, but also in stained glass that you can still see
Hmm.
today if you go to Canterbury Cathedral and look up at the so-called miracle windows, that give example after example of how people were miraculously cured by drinking Canterbury water, right? This
Hmm.
water mixed with Becket's blood. So one of the examples that I bring up in my book, and this is, I think, just these two beautiful adjacent roundels, these little stained glass circles,
Hmm.
that tell the story of, in just two images, of Mad Henry of Fordich, which is just a village that was about an hour's walk away from Canterbury. So in the first one, Mad Henry is being led into the church, and you can see he's being led to the sarcophagus where
Hmm.
Becket's bones are, and he's got two people. He's got his hands bound behind his back with rope. He's got two caretakers on either side of him who are striking him with clubs. Like, and it even says, the Latin text, it says he arrives out of his mind, right?
Hmm.
And then he is bound to Becket's tomb, tied up to
Hmm.
Becket's tomb overnight, with the hope, the term is incubation, right? With the hope that, by incubating overnight next to this martyr's tomb, that the saint is going to come to him and cure him of his mania. And
Hmm.
then the image right next to it, this second roundel, sort of confirms exactly that. It shows him, hands untied. His cape is now, instead of billowing in front of him, it's, draped properly behind his back, and he's
Hmm.
praying at the tomb as the, kind of gobsmacked caretakers from the day before are shocked at his transformation, right? So, I mean, that's arguably pretty strange and sinister in terms
Yeah.
of a cultic practice, right? That many people who would identify as Christian today see as very odd. And I think that that is really one of the main points that I wanted to get across with this book, is that we are inured to sort of thinking about that kind of version of Christianity because we're so used to whatever the 21st century
Mhm.
version of it is part of the air that we breathe. And that's, to get back to the brief history of Christianity part of the title is really what I'm trying to do with this book, to give a brief and hopefully entertaining history of the culture, the stories, the art, the architecture, the liturgies, that is the care for the saints, the Christian care for the saints, which fundamentally means that the cult and culture of Christianity that is built around the martyrs and martyrdom.
Hmm.
So that's kind of what the book is.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
feel like that's so intriguing. Like, what would you say, given like that this, like you said, this particular part of the history of Christianity is, it's on the back burner, so to speak, in our modern understanding of the faith. Like,
Yeah.
what if you could name like an aspect of Christianity that's been lost, or maybe that hasn't been, we wouldn't recognize in our modern culture as a result of not having the contents of this book, right in
Hmm.
front of us. Like, what would be like an example of maybe how the faith would have looked different back then than it does today? If you had to name one thing off the top of your head.
Um, well, I mean, I think drinking water mixed with a martyr's blood, or little bits and pieces of the blood, might be one thing. But certainly the cult of relic veneration is, though it still exists,
Yeah,
most definitely,
yeah, yeah.
is something that I think is very odd to
Hmm.
many. Let's just say many North Americans, even Catholic and Orthodox North American Christians who understand that history,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
The idea there that there is some sort of that bone is a portal to the divine, or that the saint can sort of be bilocated, right, like on earth and in heaven at the same time through their physical remains, is something that I think many today would find pretty strange.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
and might justify then the more commonly understood explanation of the word cult in the title.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So if cult's referring to, like caring for the dead, because
Hmm.
I had never thought of that before, because again, in my mind, cult means this, it's a strictly negative thing. And so
Hmm.
as I was reading the book and as I was preparing for this conversation, I was thinking back, my father passed away in March, and you know that because
Yeah.
we've been rescheduling this for the whole year, and we finally were able to make it happen. But after he passed away, my daughter, who is 6, she started asking like a lot of questions about
Yeah.
life and death and, what happened, all these different things. And, I'm in this place now where, like, I used to back in my evangelical days, I had all the answers, like I was very
Hmm.
straightforward. But nowadays I'm like, I really have no idea, what happens. And one of her favorite movies is Coco, the Pixar movie,
Hmm. Yeah.
about the Day of the Dead. And so she wanted to celebrate that this past year. And we set up a little altar, and she put a picture of grandpa on there, and he liked his coffee, so she drew him a picture of coffee. We just kind of put different trinkets on there that he liked. And so your book is primarily about martyrs, but one of the things I was wondering is this idea of like care for the dead. Now, I don't know a whole lot about the Day of the Dead. I did some Google
Hmm.
searches. I've watched the movie obviously numerous times, but I know it's about emphasizing this care for the people who have passed in our lives. And so I was wondering if there was any ties between all of this talk about cult and care for the dead and the Day of the Dead. If there's any ties like within Christianity about these things, if there's somewhere maybe in the history of Christianity where there's a similar type of celebration of saints or death of beloved family or community members? Like, is there any kind of overlap there at all? Or are these two different things? Because the whole time I was reading your book, that's the movie I was thinking of, and those are the images I had in my head.
Yeah. Wow. Well, there's a lot there, a lot to unpack.
Hmm.
I mean, I like that movie quite a lot too. That movie, and for those who haven't seen it, right? There's this idea that there's this realm,
Hmm.
that there's the land of the living, and that there's the land of the dead, and that there's an actual bridge that can be crossed,
Hmm.
one time a year on the Day of the Dead, between these two realms of the living and the dead. Um, and part of the other thing of the story, you mentioned, the altar
Hmm.
for your dad, and that you had a photograph of him there, and that's kind of one of the main things of that movie,
Hmm.
right? That if the people who are still alive, if your family members, those who loved you, your friends, aren't putting up your picture on the altar to remember you annually, that in this land of the dead, you slowly fade away.
Hmm.
Kind of like Marty McFly, that photo of him in Back to the Future.
Right.
Remember that,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Yeah, like you've never been there. I mean, I think that's just that's beautiful, right? That
Hmm.
sort of compels you as somebody, and your daughter as someone remembering your father,
Hmm.
to do this, to keep his memory alive. Actually, have you ever read the book Sum by David Eagleman? Does that ring a bell? You
No.
know that book? Yeah,
No.
so Eagleman he's a writer, and he's a neuroscientist, and that book is this collection of what he calls 40 tales from the afterlives.
Mm.
They're very short stories. Most of them are, 1 or 2 pages, that are fictional speculations on, what the afterlife might be like.
Mm.
And one of them starts out with the narrator telling you that every human, every single one of us, dies 3 deaths. The first one is the obvious one, when the body
Hmm.
stops functioning. The second one is your funeral, the sort of communal or ritual one, when your body is consigned to the grave.
Hmm.
And the third one, and this to me is just haunting, the third one is that unknowable moment in the future when your name is spoken for the last time,
Mm.
right? When you have been forgotten by
Yeah. That
everybody
gave me
on Earth.
chills. Yeah.
I know, isn't? I mean,
Yeah.
it's so scary,
Creepy.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's creepy. But that's kind of what's going on with Coco here, right?
Yep.
With
Yep.
this altar and the photographs, and that you will fade away into some other realm. But Eagleman's story is I think really instructive here for even thinking about the Christian cult of the dead and Christian care for the saints. Let me just play out his fictional speculation here for a second. So he says that those who have ended up in the realm of the dead are in this huge lobby, like the biggest airport waiting lounge you've ever seen,
Hmm.
with all the people whose names are still being spoken, and that when it's your turn to sort of pass through to some other unknown, when nobody else is saying your name on Earth anymore, there's a public address announcement, and you pass through a door, and who knows where you go. He says, so everybody's just kind of waiting in this lobby for their third death, and some people don't want to go when their name is called, but others, namely people whose names are in the history books and have been there forever, are kind
Hmm.
of ready to go.
Get me out of
Um,
here.
Get me
Right.
out of here, exactly, right? But then he talks about those who have been completely divorced from their names, and the
Hmm.
example that he gives is some otherwise anonymous farmer who has this unfortunate accident a couple hundred years ago, and he drowns in a river. Well, but then later a college was built right along the river, and so each time the undergraduate who's giving the tour guide to the prospective students passes by that river, they tell the story of this farmer who died. And every single year the story gets embellished a little bit and drifts farther and farther from reality. So here this guy is in the waiting room, his name gets invoked every time any prospective student needs a tour, and yet it has nothing to do with him or his life, right?
Yeah.
And the reason why I bring that up, and why I absolutely love that story by Eagleman, by the way, if anybody listening to this is going to buy one book today, it should be David Eagleman's
Yeah. I just
40
wrote it
Lives.
down because I'm gonna go get that as soon as we're done.
Now, if you buy two, buy mine. But if you
Right.
buy
There you
one,
go.
buy Eagleman's, right? Yeah. Anyway, but the reason why I bring it up is my colleague out at Berkeley, Daniel Boyarin, has this wonderfully pithy line. He says, being killed is an event. Martyrdom is a literary form, a genre,
Mhm.
right? And we
Mhm.
have to keep those two things separate and in mind, that yes, there is the event of a death, but then the story about it, how that develops,
Mhm.
that kind of escapes, right? Because the what Eagleman sort of closes with in his story is that that's the curse of this waiting room, is
Mhm.
that since we can only live, we the dead can only live in the heads of those who remember us, we lose control of our lives and we become who they want us to be, who those who
Mm,
are still telling the story about us want us to be.
mm,
Um, so I haven't really answered your question. Now, one parenthetical aside in typical fashion leads to another. But you asked specifically about the connection between the cult of the dead and the Day of the Dead.
yeah.
I mean, I think. I mean, so think about when it is on the calendar on November 2nd, right?
Mhm.
Right. It's this 3-day festival for the Christian dead. All Halloween. A lot of people may have forgotten this or never knew this. It's just a contraction for All Hallows Evening, the night before All Saints Day on
Right,
November
right.
1st, right? And November 2nd being the feast of All Souls, or the Day of
Mhm,
the Dead. Um, Intriguing historical explanation about this. Um, the All Saints wasn't always on November 1st. It was moved there officially by Pope Gregory the Fourth, I think the fourth, yeah, in the ninth century.
mhm,
Um, uh, but previously, it wasn't for all the saints, right? We think of Saint Francis, we think of all
mhm,
these other saints who may not have died as martyrs. But initially, the term saint was coextensive with the term martyr. That's who you were referring to. We know this, that that's what it really meant early on from some of the earliest calendars of
mhm,
the saints that we have, which were basically just lists of names, back to that names again, right?
mhm,
List of names of the dead and the day that they died, right? And you would tell the story of that person on that
mhm,
day. And we have, like, actually the oldest dated book in the world. And what I mean by oldest dated book is the oldest book that actually has the scribe saying
mhm,
when he wrote this book.
mhm,
Dates to the month of November. What correlates to the month of November? He didn't use that term for the month, but what correlates to the month of November in the year 411.
mhm,
And it's a Syriac manuscript that you can still find. You can still read it at the British Library. And at the back of the book is a list of names of the dead and the days that they died, right?
mhm,
And it talks about the day on which each of these Christian martyrs received their crown, right? So here's this link
mhm,
to Jesus, of course, who wore the crown of thorns, but also to the first martyr, Stephen,
mhm,
in Acts, right?
mhm,
Whose name in Greek, Stephanos, means crown. Right, so you're talking about the day that all of these saints were crowned, won the paradoxical victory of death, sorry, over death through their deaths,
mhm,
right? And All Saints Day is the first Friday after Easter Sunday. That's when all the saints, all these martyrs, were honored. All Souls Day was the Saturday between Good Friday and Easter Sunday, when Jesus himself is said to have descended to the land of the dead
mhm,
on that Saturday. So it wasn't until a medieval Catholic abbot in France, in Cluny, in the 11th century, put a special day for all these not quite saints, as the day after All Saints Day, right, on
Yeah.
November 2nd, right? For in this case, not such a beautiful sort of cocoa imaginative world of Technicolor and animals,
Mhm,
but you're talking about purgatory, right? The
mhm,
reason why you've got this day is because you've got all these not quite saints whose sins have to be purged and burned away before they're sufficiently disinfected to continue on up to heaven.
mhm.
But yeah, whenever I think about Halloween, it's hard not to, for me, given my background, to think about martyrs and to think about the probably unpleasant purging of one's sins that is supposedly happening in purgatory
Yeah.
uh, on the Day of the Dead. But the Mexican tradition, right, of setting up marigolds
Mhm.
and altars is if I were going to embrace one, that's the much more beautiful one to think
I like that
about.
one too.
Yeah, yeah,
I prefer
yeah,
that. Yeah, the land of cocoa is a land that is very colorful, and I wouldn't
yeah.
mind dabbling in. So one of the things that like all this talk about martyrs that really strikes me is that so many of them seem to have what's the word, like this passion for death, this passion for
Hmm.
following in the footsteps of Jesus to their own gruesome death. Like there's stories of people obviously being afraid, but more often than not it seems like these people, whether they're afraid or they're not afraid, they have this, I would call it, a slightly twisted idea that their execution due to their refusal to denounce Jesus is somehow going to earn them like brownie points or something like that in
Hmm.
heaven. So in the book, you tell stories, of a lot of martyrs, and I was wondering if you could maybe pick one or two that specifically to share with our listeners where it shows this person being not excited, but almost like fearless as they kind of walk towards the flames, the swords, the lions, knowing that or believing that this act is somehow going to make them a true disciple. It's going to get them the big pat on the back from God, and that this martyrdom is actually like a good thing to exist in the world.
Yeah, I'd love to tell a couple of stories.
Mhm,
But I mean, we can back up just very briefly, right?
mhm,
And think about that where the roots of this are. The idea of reverencing and imitating the death of Jesus
mhm.
is right there in the New Testament itself. I mean,
Yep,
you can think about how the Gospels quote Jesus as warning his disciples that they're going to be flogged and dragged before kings and governors for the sake of his name.
yep.
Or I mentioned Stephen just a minute ago. Think how the Acts of the Apostles narrates his death, right? He's
Mhm,
traditionally celebrated as the first Christian martyr. That's why his feast day is December 26th, right after
mhm,
the Nativity, the beginning of the liturgical year, the place of honor there. So as Stephen is being stoned to death, there's a fascinating parallel between Jesus's death as it's narrated in Luke and that of Stephen in
mhm,
Acts. Same author, so it makes sense, right?
mhm,
Author of Luke Acts. But Stephen repeats Jesus's final words from the cross, but instead of saying, Father, receive my spirit, he says, Lord Jesus, receive my spirit. Right? This is why he's called the first Christian martyr, because in
mhm,
more or less his own words, he's dying for Christ. Okay.
mhm,
Um, so, and we've got stories about all of the apostles, with the exception of John.
mhm,
All of them died violently,
mhm,
died, a martyr's death, at least according to early Christian tradition, right?
mhm.
Simon gets sawed in half in Persia, Thomas gets speared in India, Paul is beheaded, Bartholomew is flayed. Uh, he's got his skin cut off if flayed isn't in your everyday vocabulary.
Right.
Um, right. So, but the question that I sort of deal with in my book
Mhm.
isn't so much of one of did this actually happen, but what meanings are being communicated by these stories? Why do they
Yeah.
become such important stories for
Yeah.
generation upon generation of Christians to tell over and over again? And you had to just to give a couple of examples of non apostles
Mhm.
who who do this. The one that comes to mind immediately is Ignatius of Antioch.
Mm.
He's the bishop of the city in what's now southeastern Turkey, right on the border with Syria. In the early second century, he's being dragged from Antioch to Rome, and he's going to be thrown to the beasts. And we have a series of letters, some of which are clearly later embellishments or elaborations or not actually written by him, but a couple of which may well be from the hand of this second century bishop. And the letter to the Romans is one of the so-called jewels of the collection. And in this letter, he talks about, he's telling those who might intervene on his behalf, right, to save him. He says, you're not doing me any favors by doing that. He says,
Mm.
let me be ground in the jaws of martyrdom, in the ground in the jaws of this lion, so that I can be ground like wheat to be baked into Christ's pure bread, is his term, right?
Mm.
He clearly sees this as simply what it means to be a disciple of Jesus, to be
Mm.
willing to face death.
Mm.
And it's not just him. Um, I tell a story at the opening chapter of the book about Saint Alban, probably not a saint that many people have heard of or know much about. And which is another kind of point of the book, is that we've got these traces of martyrs all over the place. For example, I tell this story because I walk through or used to walk through a park named for
Mhm.
Saint Alban when I was taking my kids to school every morning when they were
Mhm.
younger. And they know the story of St. Alban, but I doubt anybody else knows the story of St. Alban. And the real brief brushstrokes version of it is that he's not a Christian, but there's some sort of Roman persecution going on, a persecution of Christians in third or maybe fourth century England. And this priest comes, knocking at his door, who's on the run from the Roman authorities. And Alban welcomes him in and sort of starts watching him as he's doing his prayers, and then decides that he himself too wants to be a Christian. And then eventually, right, the Roman soldiers show up, and Albin, kind of thinking fast, he swaps his clothes for those of
Hmm.
the priest and presents himself to the soldiers instead. And then later, standing before a judge, even when sort of the gig is up and they realize that he wasn't the priest that they were looking for, he still insists that he's a Christian and that he wants to die too.
Mm,
And he's got every opportunity to save his own skin, but he doesn't want to. He
mm,
realizes somehow that this is what discipleship is supposed to mean. And as he's being taken to the place of execution by the executioner, they have to cross a river.
mm.
And well, all these people have clogged up the bridge going across the river because they want to see this, lurid spectacle. And so he prays to the heavens because he's in a hurry. He's in a hurry to get to this place of execution. He can't wait for the bridge to clear. And he prays that the water will dry up so that they can cross the bridge that way. Of
Mm.
course, the executioner sees this happen, right? The river immediately stops flowing, and he drops his sword and falls at Albin's feet. And the comical result here is that now you got to find a backup executioner, right?
Right.
Who ends up then executing both Albin and the first executioner.
Mm.
And my kids, who will definitely be in therapy later in their lives, I've heard this story so many times, but their question about it never really changed. It wasn't like this miracle that was intriguing to them. It's, I think, the question that you were asking initially is,
Yeah.
why this hurry to rush to death? And time and again in these martyrdom stories that we have from late antiquity, you don't have the martyr, the prospective martyr, being afraid, or there's not much talk of suffering, and they aren't unwilling. They go to their deaths, in some cases, like Albin, quite in a hurry, and other cases just accepting it willingly.
Mm.
And it gets back to this sort of idea that you're getting in Ignatius's letter that I mentioned, that being willing to die for Christ, at least in this literature, right,
Mhm.
isn't some sort of lofty ideal, but just the basic expectation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's funny, while I was thinking about when I was reading these stories and I was thinking back over my own time in the church and my own education,
Yeah.
I went to a private Christian school from like the 4th through 12th grades. And I can remember like this whole idea of martyrdom is not necessarily a foreign idea even today, because I can remember having a Bible teacher who wanted us to read the book, the Jesus Freak books. Have you read those? Or
No,
come
I
across
haven't.
them? Yeah, so the Jesus Freak book is basically it's a collection of stories of martyrs, and
Oh,
it's maybe 200 pages, and there's I think 2 or 3 volumes. And so I got them as a kid because I thought they were, oh, this is interesting. People who wanted to, who gave up their life because of their faith in Christ. And I remember our Bible teacher saying to us, like literally I can remember this, and they gave me nightmares. So talk about needing therapy was, that there are people in this life who God will call to stand up and have their life on the line for their faith in Christ. And the question will be made to those people, do you believe? In that moment, you have a
mm,
decision that you have to make, and that this is the ultimate call of God to have this happen to you and to become a martyr. And I remember going to bed at night, like literally being in like the like ninth and 10th grade, horrified because is God going to call me to be one of these people? And
don't pick
scared,
me. Don't
like,
pick me.
"God, I love you so much, but please, like, I don't have the strength to be able to do this." But,
Yeah.
all this talk about having having the courage and really the desire to go forward into this, it just brought up a lot of those memories in me because, like I said, it's not necessarily a super foreign idea in some, I think, of the more fundamentalist settings that do exist within Christianity today. So this language is very prevalent in those worlds, I think.
Yeah. Um, I'm that's a massive oversight on my part. I need to find this Jesus Freaks. But it's from what I understand from what you just said, it's kind of a collection of early Christian martyr stories, but specifically for evangelicals by means
Yes.
of saying,
Yeah,
here,
and I
okay,
think it was
okay,
based upon the DC Talk album, I think was called Jesus Freaks back in the day, and I think that they
okay.
they kinda helped push this theme. And the stories were some of the early Christians. There were some like more modern stories as well, but it's just a whole collection of these horrifying stories that
Right.
I was deathly afraid were going to happen to me.
Right. I mean, where the interesting thing there is, I mean, just in terms of the theological idea or
Hmm.
ideals that those stories are espousing, and some of the ones that I've just related, is the fundamental bodiliness of Christianity, at
Yep.
least historically speaking,
Yep.
right? That it's
Yep.
not that in fact it's not just simply a matter of yes, I assent to this proposition that
Hmm.
Jesus is the divine Son of God, and okay, now I'm done, right? You have to actually do things, whether that's ritual actions or be prepared for uh, the more physical action, as
Yep.
these books were suggesting, right, of martyrdom.
Yep.
But it makes sense theologically, right? If you have this notion of the incarnation, this idea that God really became flesh in the person of Jesus, took on a body, then what you do with your body, it's unlike some of the so-called, Gnostic sects or Christians from late antiquity,
Hmm.
who would have said, "Look, these people are crazy, who are willing to go to martyrdom or willing to die as martyrs." Because it's about the light within you, it's about your soul, it's about this
Right.
some sort of disembodied ethereal realm. But if you think, of all the church councils that from Nicaea in 325 all the way up to Chalcedon in 451 and all the ones in between, right? Every single one of those fundamental theological meetings of these bishops from around the Roman world was to hash out, how do you understand the nature of Christ?
Yep.
And if, as the ultimate theological decision is that he's both God and man, somehow paradoxically existing in one person, then that gives a power and an importance to the body and to what you're doing with it, right? You can't
Mm.
just offer this incense to the emperor, or offer animal sacrifice to some pagan god and say, well, I've got my fingers crossed behind my back and it doesn't really matter, right?
Right.
I think that's so in an odd sort of way. I got to find these texts, but it's it that these evangelical reminders are sort of coming full circle. Maybe it's not
Yep.
the cult of the saints, right?
Hmm.
But it's using those stories as pedagogically useful,
Yep.
by way of conveying a certain theological idea that I've just been talking about.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So you bring up an interesting point about like you talked about like the Gnostics. And
yeah,
as I was reading your book, I was reminded of a conversation I had with David Brackey on the show,
hmm
maybe like a year and a half ago. But he came on to talk about his commentary on the Gospel of Judas. Now I don't know if you've read any of it at all, but the commentary was way over my head. He talks all about like Coptic and all different things, and I did my very best to make my way through the parts that I could understand that were in English. But I also went and picked up like Karen King and Elaine Pagel's book, and Bart
hmm
Ehrman wrote a book on Judas as well. And one of the things that we dialogued in this episode about is how there's this one point in the story, and I don't exactly remember the scene of what was going on, but the David brought out this idea that the Gospel of Judas the writer kind of shines a light on and calls out these religious leaders who seem to encourage people to get themselves killed for their faith, as if that's going to be give them some kind of a reward. And I think in the text, it's the writer almost has Jesus like laughing at this idea because it's like so ridiculous. And so I'm curious, like given what we know about the history of Christianity, we know that it's wide, it's diverse. Nobody really had the corner market on things. But I'm wondering, all the people who elevated martyrdom as this great thing, what was the debate like? Like, what kind of pushback did those people receive from maybe other branches of Christianity who said that's ridiculous, that that's just not at all the way that it is?
yeah. Well, let me phrase it in a perhaps unexpected way.
Hmm.
Um, I think that most of the debate probably played out less in terms of theological treatises than in stories that are getting told.
Mm,
And what I mean by
interesting.
that is that the stories that get told about particular saints are filled with theological meaning, but
Mhm.
they're framed as a narrative that a regular person can hear and understand and sympathize with
Mm.
because it's dramatic, right?
Mm.
If you're uh, if you're trying to convey a particular point, you're going to convince a lot more people by telling a memorable story that has an intelligible moral or point to it than
Mhm.
you are by writing some sort of letter or angry letter to the editor,
Right.
or theological treatise or something like
Right.
that, right? So, but you get that. I think you get a moderation in a couple of these stories.
Mm.
For example, in the story of Polycarp, who was supposedly this martyr in the middle of the second century. There's an aside about this other guy who is very keen to be killed for Christ, but then when he has the opportunity, just kind of like what you were saying, I don't, he backs off. He
Yeah, I don't
doesn't
know
know that
about this.
he's not gonna be able to do it, right? But then the problem is that you end up as an apostate, right? If you've
Yep.
presented yourself as like, I'm ready to go here, and then you realize you're going to be brutally murdered and have your head chopped off or whatever it is, you might be a little more inclined to say, okay, give me that pinch of incense or that bit of wine I need to pour out for the emperor.
Yeah.
And in so let me I mentioned, a lot of my work is in Syriac.
Mhm.
And one of the stories that I published some years ago, an English translation of a couple of stories about this bishop called Simeon Bar Sabae. Simeon, the son of cloth dyers, is his name.
Mhm.
So in that story about Simeon, who's this sort of heroic bishop martyr in Persia in the fourth century, there's an aside about this man named Gushtazad.
Mhm.
Gushtazad was a tutor of the Persian king. He'd known the king for decades, since the king was young, and somehow ends up converting to Christianity. Well, word about this gets back to the Persian king, and the king says, I need you to bow down to the sun, to make a physical gesture of worship to the sun, to prove to
Mhm.
me that you're not a Christian.
Mhm.
And he does it. And so Simeon, the bishop, gets word of this and basically shuns him, says, you have apostatized, right? You have
Mhm.
denied Christ. And as the story continues, Gushtazad sort of comes to realize that the only way he can atone for that is washing away his sins with his own blood.
Mhm.
And by then going back before the king and insisting, no, in fact, I am a Christian,
Mhm.
knowing that it's going to get him killed, right? So that's kind of what I mean here, is that in stories like that one and others, um, that are rich in theological meaning, but also deal exactly with the sort of issue that you're talking about, of first of all promoting martyrdom as really important, but also showing the flip side, that
Mhm.
if this does, maybe you shouldn't go running and seek it out and say, where's the hangman's noose, where's the executioner's sword, give it to me, I'm ready. Don't do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But if it does come to you and you apostatize, there's really not much way of getting out of this other than coming back to the second baptism that's not in water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that brings up a good point because again, going back to those Jesus Freak books, like I remember reading those and I was just assuming that all these stories that are being told happen exactly as they're being told because that's
Right.
also the way that I was taught to read the Bible back in that day
Hmm.
was all the stories being told like this is how it happened, but now I'm in this place where like you said earlier, it's not so much about the historicity of the story but about the endurance of the story. Like what is it about, these particular stories in Matthew or Mark or Luke or Acts or whatever that have endured the test of time to,
Right.
still make their way onto my shelf and your shelf? Like what is it about these stories that speaks so deeply to us? But I think that's an interesting approach to bring to these stories of the martyrs as well, because it's not so much about whether or not it happened exactly like this, but the point that the writers of these stories or the tellers of these stories are trying to get across in the way that they're telling the story of these people. So I think it's interesting that you could tell these two different stories with the two different martyrs in such a way that it elevates different theological principles or different ideas that might be at odds with each other, but it all comes down to the way that the story is told. I think that's really, really interesting.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. I had I'm sure you've heard of Rob Bell.
Um, I
Maybe, maybe not.
maybe I don't know.
He wrote a whole bunch of books, but like Love Wins, he talked about like there's a book about kind of a different angle on hell. He used to be a pastor, but now he does a whole lot of different things. But anyway, he was on the show yesterday. I talked to him, and he wrote a book called
Mm,
"Where'd You Park Your Spaceship?" And it's this like science fiction book, and it's this crazy story. But buried in this crazy story are all these gems of ideas. And one of the questions I asked him was, why didn't you just write a book about these ideas? Like, why did you tell it in this particular way? And the answer that he gave was because, telling the story comes at these different ideas in a way that surprises the reader, and I think even buries them deeper in your subconscious, because now that I've read that story, like there's so many different like one-liners I come away with that I'm thinking deeper about that I probably wouldn't have thought as deeply about if he would have wrote this expository book, taking apart these different ideas and building up this theology or whatever. Like it's almost like Jesus' parables, right? Like it comes at it from an entirely different way and draws you in. So I
yeah.
love it.
Truth better conveyed via poetry.
Yes,
Right.
exactly, exactly. So one of the big themes in the book as well is the belief that when a martyr is put to death, that they're still able to intervene in the world, which is a
Hmm.
theme I love. I loved reading about this in the book, and how people would even bring like bones and I think like pieces of clothing and things like that, like into these churches and house these things there. So I was wondering if we talk a little bit about this, maybe again like another story or so about a particular martyr who was seen to be continuing to intervene on behalf of a church or a community or a group of people, but then also what happened to those relics or to those bones if the saint or the martyr was seen to stop intervening on behalf of the community. Because I thought that was really interesting too, because it was like
Yeah.
we're gonna elevate this person, we're gonna bring in their bones, but now the bones aren't doing what they were doing, so now we're gonna do something different with them. So take us into that.
Yeah, well, at the end there, what you're referring to is a relatively short-lived practice. I think it was in France, maybe in the
Mhm,
13th century, before it was suppressed as not such a good idea, where relics, these martyrs' bones, would be humiliated, as in put on the humus on the ground, right?
mm,
Taken out of their reliquary, put on the ground, left there in the cold and the dark with the candles snuffed out, if they weren't doing what they were supposed to be doing for those who were venerating those bones belonging to some saint, right? If the saint
mm,
was failing in his or her duty to care for the community who were remembering and venerating them, then you do something to the relics. I mean, it sounds kind of crazy,
mhm,
but if you enter into the mind of those who are doing this and ask why, they're not understood as just desiccated bones. They are portals. They are
mm,
physical points of intersection, as I said before,
mhm,
where heaven and earth converge, right? And I mean, and that's why the saints are so important. Here, their relics are on earth, and yet they're in heaven. And so you have this sort of immediate intercessor, somebody who's got the ear of God.
mm,
And patronage is understood as a two-way street. You venerate this saint, but that you have this expectation that the saint is going to care for you. Um, I can give you another example, though. It's
mhm,
not just the relics, but I mentioned that, but it's icons too. These like Eastern Orthodox paintings of the
mm,
saints. So I mentioned I'm writing now a book about Saint Nicholas. Um, he's hugely venerated in what's now Russia, Ukraine, and his icons are so widespread there that you can refer to an icon as a Nicholas, even if you're not referring to
mm,
an icon of Nicholas. It was just,
mm.
like we'd use the word Kleenex as a stand-in to refer to tissues, right? You use
Right,
a
right.
brand name, right? And so there's one Nicholas story. A lot of them are a bit anti-Semitic, some of the ones that get
Mm,
told in the Middle Ages, but there's one about this wealthy Jewish man. This gets told in the Golden Legend, this 13th century compilation of lore about the saints, who obviously not Christian,
mhm,
but he knows about Nicholas, how much of a guardian Nicholas is. So he commissions an icon to be painted of Nicholas, and he sets up this icon at his house and says to the icon, says, Nicholas, watch over all of my wealth, watch over all of my riches. I'm depending upon you.
Mhm.
And everything's fine for a while, but then he leaves and he comes back one day. Everything has been completely stolen and looted from his house. The only thing that's there is the icon. What does he do? He starts punching the icon. He starts kicking the icon. He starts throwing the icon on the ground, cursing Nicholas, saying, I thought you were going to protect all of my gold and my jewels,
Right.
right? And so then, Nicholas, who's, somehow bilocating or whatever, um, he appears, Nicholas does, in some form to the thieves and says,
Mm.
look, you got to give all this stuff back because I'm getting beaten up back in this guy's house right now. And the thieves say, who are you and what are you going to do? And he's, explains that he's Nicholas, explains that, that God is going to punish them if they don't bring everything back. So they bring everything back. And then, of course, they convert to Christianity and the Jewish man converts to Christianity too, right? So kind of bizarre stories. But, even if you go into the Holy Sepulchre today,
Mm.
the church in Jerusalem, built over the site where Jesus was supposedly crucified and then later buried, um, you have people who are coming in. You mentioned cloths, right?
Mhm.
With little handkerchiefs, with lace handkerchiefs, and they'll pour oil on the supposed anointing stone where Jesus's body was prepared,
Mm.
and then they'll wipe it off, right? Because this is understood as a contact relic. It has touched something that supposedly touched Jesus. That
Mhm.
goes back so many centuries, where we
Mm.
have, for example, in the 4th century, we have this diary, this basically travel log of this woman named Egeria, who was
Mhm.
seems like she was a nun from France or from Spain. And she talks about being in the Holy Sepulchre at the time of Easter when the actual cross was brought out and venerated.
Mm.
And that there's just this mass of pilgrims who were trying to touch it, who were trying to kiss it. You have a later pilgrim story that talks about these little vials of olive oil that get touched. They're in little test metal
Mhm.
thimbleful containers, right? That they would get touched to the cross and that the oil inside of them would start fizzing and bubbling, like it'd come alive, right? Because
Mm.
so I've got this contact relic of a contact relic.
Hmm.
But the whole idea here is that these physical things that are associated with a martyr or associated with Jesus still have power. They are not
Mm.
just something to be put in a museum. The
Yeah.
theological idea here, but again, it's not just Catholic and Orthodox superstition. If you think back to what is it, Acts 19,
Mm.
the miracles that supposedly happened through Paul when handkerchiefs or aprons that he had
Yeah.
touched are brought to the sick, right? And that here you are, you're using God, or you're using this holy person as this vessel, right,
Mm.
of God. And I mean, I think that sort of idea is conveyed, uh, through that as well. But even in the story, for example, I'll give you one last story on this
Mhm.
point. Um, Ambrose, the Bishop of Milan in the
Mhm.
4th century, um, he's got a new basilica that's being built in his city, and everybody, all of his congregation, are badgering him to find some relics to enshrine, to install underneath the altar of the
Mhm.
church. And we know about this from a letter that he wrote to his sister. Long story short, he finds these relics. He has his priest dig up these old bones, and then they're tested. How do you know that these are the bones of a martyr? Well, a blind man is brought before them and regains his sight. A sick woman is
Mm.
cured, right, immediately. And as these bones are being processed into the basilica and going to be enshrined then, in Milan's new basilica, Ambrose stands up and he starts preaching to his congregation. And he refers back to the story that I just told about Paul. He says, remember back in Acts
Mm.
when just these handkerchiefs that touched Paul could cure the sick. He says, now you come do the same. Bring up your cloths, touch them to the bones of these martyrs, and just watch what happens, to these, now divinely infused textiles,
Right.
right? Um, but I mean, I think, that's interesting too, right? The use of the Bible and the use of these past miracles to tell
Yeah.
another story, to explain the importance of, the current miracles that could happen, and all getting back to this, the fundamental bodiliness of Christianity in ancient and medieval periods,
Yeah.
that is just lost on us and sounds really bizarre today.
Yeah. Now, is there like talk about like Ambrose and how we know of this event from this letter that he
Yeah.
wrote? Is is there like there is like there's debate within Christianity about the Bible, like the inerrancy of the Bible and
Mhm.
whether it's a historical book or whether it's this collection of stories or whatever. Is there a similar debate in the world of like that story with Ambrose? Like, is there a group that thinks that like this really happened, that he, found these bones and that he invited these people to touch their things to the bones and that maybe miracles did happen? And there's other people who maybe say that again, like we said earlier, this is a story that was told in this way to emphasize a particular point. Like, is there that kind of debate going on within this world as well, just like there is in the Bible, or not so much?
Um, well, I mean, maybe, but I mean, I don't. I can't speculate about whether or not these miraculous healings occurred. Right?
Sure.
Um, I wasn't there. I didn't see what happened. But
Good answer.
you know, uh, but I mean, I think. Look, let me just to back up here,
Mhm.
or to broaden it out. Um, that's kind of what I wanted to avoid with this book, is
Mhm.
questions of, did it actually happen? Again, I'm much more interested in who is telling these stories, what meanings the repetition of these stories
Yep.
means for them, and how that goes about shaping the culture of Christianity. But
Yep.
um, this question of, of truth, of did it actually happen, is one that has preoccupied people for a long time. So, for example, there was a group of Jesuit priests in the 17th century who came to be called the Bollandists, after
Mhm.
their founder, Jean Bolland. And here we are, post-Reformation, early 17th century. Their goal is to scientifically, sort of proto-scientifically, examine the stories of the saints, which also meant
Mhm.
collecting every single one that they possibly could in whatever language that had been written, to then sort of critically examine them and vet them and say, what could work here, what might not work here.
Mhm.
And I mean, this is a group, the Bollandists, that still exists today as this sort of hundreds of years long exercise in collaborative scholarship. And one of the most famous Bollandists in recent memory was a French scholar by the name of Hippolyte Delahaye, who died in
Mhm.
the 1940s. In a lot of his works, he says he's very careful. He says, "Look, I'm not attacking the saint, but I
Mhm.
am attacking literary falsehoods." And
Mhm.
he sort of has this whole process of ranking the stories, right, which is a bit old-fashioned and strange now. But he says, on the one hand, we've got myths, kind of like ancient Greece. We've got tales, things that begin, once upon a time. We've
Mhm.
got romances and legends. And he says these things are kind of problematic. He says, what we're looking for, if we want to try to find the truth value, is if we had trial reports from the Romans, right? If we had testimonies of eyewitnesses that we could use.
Mhm.
But he ultimately sort of says, well, he's like, we've got a couple of letters from Ignatius and maybe some stuff from Eusebius, this very important church historian in the fourth century. Um, but I mean, it brings up a good point of, like,
Mhm.
how do you go about evaluating texts like this? Not bracket the stuff about the miracles, but just
Mhm.
the question of, like, was somebody killed for their faith, as this story is talking about? The difficulty is that you is most of the noise that you have is one-sided,
Mhm.
right? You have the Christian stories, but you don't have sort of non-Christian corroborating documentary evidence.
Mhm.
It's great when you do.
Mhm.
So I can give you one quick example, and one actual example is, we have the Syriac story about the siege of Nisibis, which is this Roman Mesopotamian city. The
Mhm.
Persians lay siege to it. The bishop of the city, Jacob, stands up on the city walls and he calls upon God. And according to the story, all these clouds of gnats and mosquitoes fly up into the noses of the Persian horses and elephants, and they go crazy and they end up trampling their own troops. And the siege is over, right?
Mm.
I mean, it's this, lovely miracle story, but you also have a uh, in Latin, a Roman military historian called Ammianus Marcellinus, whose name is fun to say 5 times fast. So, so Ammianus Marcellinus, definitely not a Christian. He is writing about all of these Roman wars in Roman Mesopotamia in the 4th century, and he's got this line about the Persian elephant drivers. And he says that they all have these long curved daggers bound to their right hands so that they can sever the spinal column of any beast that becomes uncontrollable. And then he says the key line, remembering what had happened in Nisibis,
Ah,
right? So
interesting.
like, okay, maybe, bugs really did
Right.
make these elephants go crazy.
Yeah,
But you've got two very different versions of the story
interesting. Yeah.
of what happened. But just to give one other example, the Emperor Decius
Mhm.
in the middle of the 3rd century. We don't know a whole lot about him. He was a soldier. He didn't live very long as emperor. He comes to power in the summer of 249. By the summer of 251, he's dead. He comes to power during a bad time in the Roman Empire, the so-called imperial crisis of the mid
Mm.
3rd century. You've got Germanic tribes pressing in from the north. You've got Persians. You've got constant assassination of one emperor after the next. You've got rebellions. You've got a devaluation of the coinage. You've got other economic problems. You've got plague. You've got crops failing. Everything is bad.
Mm.
What does he do? He puts out an edict that everybody has to offer sacrifice to the gods.
Mm.
The world is falling apart. We need, back to this whole idea of reciprocal responsibilities, right? We need to do what's important on our end in
Mhm.
terms of offering sacrifice so that the gods will come and help us out here because the world is going
Mm.
to hell. Um, well, the Christian understanding of that is that this is anti-Christian legislation, right?
Mm.
And we have stories where we hear from Cyprian of Carthage, Dionysius of Alexandria, and some other sort of martyrdom stories that understand this as a very specifically anti-Christian measure. Makes sense.
Mhm.
We've also have the great discovery some decades ago of an Egyptian trash pile of basically what were receipts verifying that certain people had made sacrifice
Mm.
along the lines of this edict that the emperor had put out. The intriguing thing, though, is that in one of them, or in a couple of them, it says something to the effect of like, I, such and such, a priestess of the goddess, blah, 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 somebody who's definitely not Christian, right?
Mm.
So verifying that this person is also having to make sacrifice by way of saving the empire. It's not a specifically anti-Christian measure. It was an empire-wide
Mm.
sort of thing. But you're going to hear one version of the story and one sort of understanding of history, just as the story from Nisibis with Jacob and the bugs, as you do here with this edict to sacrifice. So it's fun when you have these sort of competing voices,
Mhm.
such that you can begin to paint a bit of a richer picture of what was actually going on. But in the martyrdom tales themselves, as Delahaye, I think, sort of correctly understood, they sail off into to legend and sort of epic stories pretty quickly, and trying to piece out like which element, like where is the kernel of historicity here, like what's
Mhm.
true and what's not. Um, I think people have largely kind of given up on as a bit of an impossible task.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wow. Wow. Well, Kyle, we are just about out of time, but this has been a blast. I have learned so much from you and from your book, and thank you for making time for us and for our listeners and for this perspective that you're bringing back to the Christian faith. Thank you.
my pleasure.
And real quick, is there any place online you want to point people to interact with you or your work, or where they can find more of you?
Uh, well, sure. I sort of cornered the market on Kyle Smith TO, as in Kyle Smith, Toronto, Ontario. So that's kylesmithto.com and Kyle Smith TO on Twitter and Instagram. Yeah.
Awesome. I'll put the links in the show notes, and maybe we can do this again when the St. Nick book comes out.
Oh, that would be fabulous.
Yeah, sunny days, sunny days. No clouds in the sky, about to get away. Feels like it's been a freaking decade. Sorry, don't call me, cause I'm gonna be on break. Sunny day, make way. All the stress and doubt, yeah, not today. Feels like it's been a freaking decade. Sorry, don't call me, cause I'm gonna be on break. Got the Tropicana, fresh cut sushi on a platter. Brandy, honey, it don't matter, shots till I drop. Gonna be 24/7, golden hour like a boss. And they say, yo, guess you got a 2 o'clock appointment for a champagne shot, oh yeah. I'm busy trying to take it higher, got no time for never, only spending cheddar. Wish I could do this forever. Chilling with the hottest company, they all wanna welcome me to their private penthouse suite. Yeah, now I got the key. Rooftop pool, got a heli on speed. Ocean view from the highest peak. I'm complete, oh I want this to stay. Please don't go away. Yeah, sunny days. No clouds in the sky, about to get away. Feels like it's been a freaking decade. Sorry, don't call me, cause I'm gonna be on break. Sunny day, make way. All the stress and doubt, yeah, not today. Feels like it's been a freaking decade. Sorry, don't call me, cause I'm gonna be on break.
반짝이는 waves 향긋한 너를 향해 갈게 feeling 어제나 뿐일 때 태양이 녹여 이 순간을 느껴 꿈이 아니니까
Dollars on a dolly with my homies, eco-friendly. Here we invite only positivity to this party. Don't want no drama with any bad karma. Got a lot of that in La Vida Loca. Just wanna let it all go. Yeah, I can't say no when I'm this free. Don't wanna go home or I can't sleep. Weather's so nice, only got good vibes. Yeah, we here chillin' in paradise. Sunny days. No